us as soon as he's got out of bed and brushed his teeth and I guess brushed his hair. So we're looking forward to that a lot. I see, Dan, you have it already on YouTube as well, which is fantastic.
I've just muted myself. We are live on YouTube at the moment.
Excellent.
I activated the channel, so we are live right now. We have 30 people and counting, so it's quite good. People are getting there quickly.
Great. So for the new people who have joined already, it's great to have you here. And I want to thank Dan, who has set up this incredible TSSA Thinking Zone platform for us to run online courses that you can complete in your own time, which seems to be the requirement of most teachers right now, given all the other things that you're juggling. So well done to you for making the time to be here this afternoon. It is going to be really worthwhile. We're waiting until about for another 10 minutes, I guess, for David Hyerle to join us. And we promise to start very promptly with the main business of David's course, our mini workshop this afternoon at 3:30. So thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for being here. I'm really missing seeing everybody face to face at our termly network meetings. And I know for many people, this is the replacement of that event. So welcome, lovely to know you're here, even though I can't see you.
So Jane, I think we should give them some idea about the Thinking Zone and some of the courses that we offer.
Sure. For those of you who have joined us early today, I will apologize up front that I might say things a few times. So please bear with me. But I want to draw your attention to the Thinking Zone, which is a new platform of TSSAs where there are fantastic online courses that you can complete in your own time. Most of them are 3-module courses, and that just puts it into chunk sizes that are more manageable for you to complete. You are given, the idea is with it's being 3 modules, it's a good idea to try and finish within about 3 weeks, but you're given up to 3 months to do so. However, it does carry a little bit more impetus to keep it going, and it's there for you as you need it to be able to complete. At the moment, our feature course is on deeper reading, which means deeper understanding. How do we help students gain a much deeper understanding of what they're reading and the ability to process what they're reading? And better writing, which is all about being able to express yourself with more clarity and logical flow. It is being facilitated by TSSA trainer Elmarie Peterson, who achieved miracles at Belleville Primary School. And that was in the face of many socioeconomic and language and other barriers. She's now working for the Western Cape Education Department in Metro East. So we're delighted that she's still our trainer and she's presenting that course. And then on the 1st of August, we have a really inspiring course on higher order thinking presented by Kemble Elliott, who is the Director of Critical Thinking at Hyerle School. So take a look at the courses. When you go onto the Thinking Zone on the homepage, you can see a little video which tells you a little bit about each of the courses on offer. And we really encourage you to join us because it's something that is practical. It has immediate impact on your teaching and learning. And we know that it's going to be great value for you. So please take a look. Dan, did I do a reasonable job?
Yes, I think you sold it. I think with the raise of hands, how many of you think we have sold that idea there? And it's
Oh,
here we go. There is a couple of raise of hands
so
there.
Kevin has joined us from Botswana. So isn't that cool? From Clifton?
Yes, I sent him an invite earlier today, so I'm glad he's on.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. Hi, Kevin. Lovely that you're with us. And thank you so much for responding so quickly. That's really awesome. And
There is a question there. How do I mute? Sorry, Jane, there is a question. How do I mute? Just to the attendees, you are currently, you are on mute. We can't hear you or see you, so that's not a problem. But the chat service on the side will allow you to chat to us if you need to answer a question or you have a question to ask.
Okay.
Let us know and we will attend to those questions. Also on the Facebook channel, we have a way of you asking us questions, and I'll be monitoring the Facebook channel. So put down your questions and I'll relay them to Jane, and she'll be the point of contact to get the questions answered from David.
Fantastic. Yes, I think it's going to be quite a challenge gathering questions. David has said that he's going to break this afternoon into small parts and then give time for reflection and questions. So we're going to have to be on the ball reading the questions, Dan, and on YouTube as well as on Zoom to be able to give him some questions. So it'll be a great way of just processing what we've learned. And a lot of people who are attending this afternoon already use thinking maps, but this will give us new insights. And I'll chat in a little while about our collaboration with David Hyerle, who developed the thinking maps. And he runs Thinking Schools International, which is a very similar organization to our own in terms of our commitment to effecting sustainable ongoing change across a whole school. That's something that is our goal. And how do we support that? This kind of activity this afternoon is one of the ways, but it all starts with whole staff training so that we can embed a whole culture of thinking and learning. And so we're very much on the same page as David. Both use the same model of change. And we see schools as the agents of change in South Africa and everywhere. That teachers and schools have so much power to empower the students and the other teachers that they work with. And we believe in the idea of a thinking community. So a school becomes a thinking community, but also like this, across South Africa, we're a thinking community and we support each other. And that's a really exciting prospect. And as TSSA is a nonprofit organization, it is really our goal to keep this work going. Yes, we do charge money in order to do that, and it's very challenging in these particular times, but we're very confident that we will continue to offer this and to be a catalyst for collaboration and growth and just deeper teaching and learning. So that's a bit about us. And we have 62 participants on Zoom. Dan, I don't know how many we have on YouTube.
We have currently 9 watching on YouTube, and just to say hello to them.
Super.
So we are currently...
Oh, David is joining us. Isn't that awesome?
Let me unmute him.
Good morning. Good. How are you?
Excellent. Good.
Oh, it's so exciting that we're doing this. We're really looking forward to this afternoon.
Good, good. Well, the second
early.
cup of coffee is kicking in.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
The coffee is starting to kick in, so that's good.
Oh, good, good. That's a very good thing. David, really such a warm welcome to you. It's something you and I have been chatting about for some time, that our models of change are really the same in terms of our thinking school model. And we really are delighted to be using thinking maps in many of the schools in South Africa because it's such a really accessible and powerful, explicit thinking language. And that is something that really does affect the whole school change in terms of having that common thinking language. So we really are excited to have you here today. We feel very privileged. And yeah, it's just going to be great looking forward. I know you and I have spoken about collaborating, particularly on research and examples of thinking maps work in schools. And that's something that we owe you now. So it's something that I'm actually hoping everybody who is listening today will think about sharing the great work you're doing with thinking maps. Not only with TSSA, but also with David, because he has a research foundation, and you will have seen already an example of a teacher and a school. And we'd like you to be those examples in future.
It's great. Yeah, I think, probably the most important dimension of this is the ongoing sharing of teacher and student examples and administrator examples from every level of the organization, school systems. And once that begins to happen, then another level of awareness comes about, I believe, in the depth of the work and sort of the infinite uses, because the creativity of teachers and students comes out, and you see it, and you see it evolving and developing. So it's great to be part of this.
Yep, David, I really agree with you. And I think that's where the collaboration kicks in between schools and teachers. It's so gives such moral support, as well as generates great ideas for, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that. Let me try that out. And one of the things we do in South Africa is that the idea of a drive team in the school, in 4 centers in South Africa, once a term, we have what we call a network meeting, where the drive teams from various schools in that region come together. So normally we're meeting face to face, but this is quite an empowering way to meet. And we also then reach people in other centers that we don't go to in person. So obviously everything's changing right now in terms of how do we operate. And I think this is some change.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it quite a bit recently. I just conducted a week-long online course, live, with a new school that's starting up in Pakistan. And what we began to realize is that the virtual meeting has some very positive benefits in the sense of consistent feedback and everybody having a voice through the chat sidebar. And there's just if people are open to it, I think there's a lot there. And one of the things that I began to realize too is that oftentimes in face-to-face professional development, it's those people that feel most comfortable verbalizing their ideas that speak, and this happens in classrooms as well. It's more if anything, sort of cognitive style and the medium in which we like to convey our ideas. And then, but if you bring in the visual, then you have another medium through which people can convey their ideas. And I just think there's some great advantages to virtual meetings and the sharing of them, in the sense of recording them, going back and looking. Yeah, there are just a lot of positives. It doesn't replace the face-to-face, the human connection. But I think there's a lot here. I think there's a lot here to explore, and it'll be interesting on the other side of the COVID-19 situation. What is the dynamic of change in education, and how do we, make the most of it and really gain from it? So it'll be interesting to see how professional development itself shifts, and also students being at home with parents and extended family. What does that look like, in the sense of, nurturing students. So I think there are a lot of opportunities here, but it's still a very difficult time.
Yeah. David, on that point, we've had some lovely feedback from one of the schools in Durban, which offers additional learning support, Livingston Primary School, just saying, wow, thank you for thinking maps, because I don't know how we would have communicated with the parents without them. And, they have been very proactive in the past, having evenings for the parents and training them so that they are familiar with that as a thinking language. So it's certainly, it does change the dynamic. And you were talking about, what will happen and what will we learn and we want to hold on to in future post-COVID. Just saying, we are hoping at some point to have a kind of panel discussion on that. And we'd love to invite you. It probably will be only in about January, February, because our academic year is starting to run away from us already this year. Some term schools are going to be on holiday for the whole of August. And then we come back and, September is about the only month, and then people are obsessed with the year end anyway. But in these circumstances, so yeah, that would be really, really cool to explore some of those ideas for us when we can actually move past the year end stress. We're in a more expansive mind state in January. And I know that just telling everybody as well that David is our agreed roadshow presenter for February 2021. And we don't know yet how that will manifest. So we're going to have to wait and see. But we did promise him and his family that we'd show them around a few game reserves. And so I hope that won't be virtual, but it could be.
Exactly.
It could be.
Yeah. We, watching a National Geographic special on, wildebeests in the wild, doesn't quite match the experience. I think that's parallels what's going on here in the virtual world. Living something live is much better. Yeah. One thing I did want to mention, this idea of what happens when students are not in school. We did a documentary, Thinking Foundation did, about, it was like 15 years ago when Hurricane Katrina hit Mississippi, our state of Mississippi and Louisiana. And we had many schools along the coast that we were working with, some over 5-7 years. And one school district we focused on was Pass Christian. And we created a documentary called Minds of Mississippi. And it's on the Thinking Foundation website. It's about 30 minutes long. And basically, long story short, all of their students had been using the thinking maps. All of their teachers, leadership, drive teams have been using it for years and years and years. They went from, before Katrina, from sort of a mediocre, performing school system to the top in the state, absolute top in the state. And then Katrina hit and wiped out their schools, physically destroyed their schools. And we went back and basically interviewed people there and talked about what had happened. And they said, we were trying to bring students back, and they slowly came back, and we had no materials. We had paper, we had pens, but the students knew the thinking maps, and they had a place to go. They had a common language that they could use, and they just stepped right in. They didn't need the textbooks as much. They didn't need a lot of resources because the students had become so fluent with the maps that there was a ready language for even helping them think through emotionally what was going on with, their houses, the students were coming and they were basically homeless. So the Minds of Mississippi is a powerful piece, because then what happened is that the school system was required to do testing by the state 2 months after Katrina. And you'd think these kids must be in shock. They've lost 2 or 3 months of school time. They again scored top in the state with basically having had no resources. And there's a great quote in there, something to the effect of, the students had the thinking maps. They could use those, that we had something to go to as a community. And so that was, to me, a real lesson. It's something that maybe folks want to look at now with COVID going on, is what are we really about in the 21st century? So it's worth a watch.
David, it's so poignant, because, if we have a look at why we're doing this anyway, we really believe, the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning is just the idea that we can really equip young people with strategies to cope with anything that life throws at them. And it's so encouraging when it does manifest itself outside of the very classical academic environment. It's about life in general, and that's very exciting. And David, I think we promised everybody at 3:30 we are going to kick this off officially. So what I'm going to do now is, for those of you who I've already welcomed, this is still a very warm welcome to you, the people who've logged on early. We've reached our capacity on Zoom, and now the others, I can't see how many there are on the YouTube live channel. Very, very warm. So wonderful that you're joining us this afternoon. And for many of you, this is taking the place of our normal network meetings, where we support each other on the ongoing journey of being a thinking school. And just to reiterate, that's where we're coming from. It's a very solid platform from David's perspective and ours, is that we believe in the thinking school as a model of change, because it's so sustainable when it becomes a whole community and it becomes a way of life and a culture as well as a practice. And one of the things that really helps that is a whole school thinking language. And that's where thinking maps are incredibly powerful as a thinking language, and everything connects with everything. Obviously, thinking maps help develop the dispositions, the habits of mind for success. You can use them really well in inquiry-based learning. It's part of the mix. And so we're particularly delighted that David has joined us. I just want to, before we move on to that, just to again acknowledge Dan for setting up over this time of change, a really powerful platform called the TSSA Thinking Zone, where we offer online courses that teachers can complete in their own time. Mostly they're 3-module courses, so that it's a manageable and a practical course, and there's an application aspect to it, all presented by people who have the street credibility of having implemented it themselves. So 2 of the courses at the moment, the feature course at the moment, relates very well to today's webinar. It's about deeper reading, or reading with deeper understanding, and better writing in terms of clarity and logical flow. So it's a really good sweet spot with this afternoon's webinar. And then on the 1st of August, we have a new course going live on higher order thinking. So we really hope that everybody here today will have a good look at the Thinking Zone and have a look at how we can support you on an ongoing basis. But now we're going to hand over to David and thank him so much for joining us this afternoon. And I'm really look forward to an ongoing collaboration with David, and particularly in the area of research and sharing great examples that will inspire others. David, over to you.
Great, good. Well, again, welcome everybody. I'm just getting going here in California in the early morning with a strong cup of coffee to get me going. Maybe it'll be tea another time of the day, but it's great to be here virtually. I've been to South Africa several times over maybe the last 10 years with great excitement, looking at what's going on in the expertise that's being developed by TSSA. So it's really, when I got this invitation to be here, I was wondering about, well, with this expertise and the depth of knowledge that's out there, what would be really the topics that might bring the work forward at a deeper level and provide some practical applications. I mean, this is a difficult time around the world, and here in the United States, of course, getting even the information out about what's required, and then thinking about misinformation, disinformation, a whole range of issues around media, and obviously it overlaps deeply with politics, but it really gets to the depth of, I think, what critical thinking is, and if you want to call it higher order thinking, in the sense of establishing with students their own internal language for thinking through ideas, for thinking through information. So what I'm going to do is really work with you today, virtually, on the ideas of, well, a couple of three things, really. First off, something that you may not have worked with a lot, which is the frame of reference. We oftentimes, with the thinking maps, talk about, here are these 8 maps. They're based on fundamental thinking processes. We want students to learn them. Yet a really essential part of the thinking maps model is the frame of reference, which we ask students to draw basically a rectangular frame around each one of the maps. So I want to start with that, and then I want to really move into the idea of fluency. How do we develop deep fluency by students, and why would we even do that? Why would we move from basically using them as really strong teaching strategies to a focus on student fluency? And I think we'll be able to really look at that a little more closely, looking at actual student work. And that'll lead to the third part of today's work, which is formative assessment. And this is something that is, one of the things I learned long ago when I was teaching is what you're basically assessing is what is going to be taught. And so one of the things that's assessed typically and around the world is content. That's what the specific focus of our teaching has been. Teaching, learning, and assessment is content, which for the most part is really powerful. But what we know about content now is that we have baseline textbooks and a lot of information across all the different disciplines, yet we're not really strong in the area of assessing the development of student thinking, even though we know so much about it. Cognitive science has been around for well over 100 years, the brain research, yet we don't really have I would say, a very practical way on a day-to-day basis to do formative assessment of both content and process simultaneously. And so the article that I asked you to take a look at, if you had a chance to look at it, is called Bifocal Assessment. My glasses are not the traditional bifocal, but they have a gradient. So when I'm looking farsighted, I can see out and see much better. And when I'm reading close up, I have a bifocal view. And that's really what we're going to be looking at, is how do we look at the content, which is that development of all of that rich information from the sciences to maths to a whole range of different fields, from literature into everything we know about the world. How do we focus on that and assess students' understanding of that and their conceptual development in those fields? But how do we also simultaneously focus very explicitly on the thinking? So the three areas that I want to work with today on are basically framing and fluency and formative assessment. So I'm going to share my screen now, and you're going to see if this, oh, looks like I'm disabled on the screen sharing. If we could bring up the screen sharing, that would be great.
Yeah.
Let me try again.
David, I've given you co-host abilities.
Okay, and where do I go for that? Right here, share. Okay, and do you see now my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we do.
Great, great. So today we're going to look at framing and fluency and formative assessment with the Thinking Maps model. And I'm going to start with this question. It's maybe too early in the morning for me to ask this question. Maybe it's better for you here in the afternoon, is what is meta?
Sorry, everyone. I think we just got a little bit of a technical issue there with David's link. We'll try and get him back on.
Thanks, Dan.
David has left. I'm sure he'll be joining us back. He just lost his internet connectivity. We apologize for that.
I spoke to him yesterday and they had an internet failure there for a minute or so. So it might just be that again. We don't realize that's not a uniquely South African situation.
I would also like to welcome Trevor McKenzie as well, joining us.
Yes, welcome, Trevor. It's really great that you're here. Hi, Trevor. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. And I don't know if I had my times wrong. I was jumping on at 3:30 p.m. local time and 6:30 at my time. And I see that I've come a little bit late. So I certainly apologize.
We just started incredibly promptly at 3:30. So it's absolutely fine. You haven't missed anything.
It's
We've
great
just
to see you,
lost
Jane.
contact, but David's coming back here now. So that's awesome.
Great. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And looking forward to hearing David share his expertise. There he is back again. So.
There he is. Okay, cool. Dan?
Okay, are we back?
We're back. Isn't that awesome? Right.
Great. Well, I guess we all just needed a break, that's all.
Well, we have to roll with the punches at the moment in today's world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to go back to screen share, if I could do that. And here we are. So what I'd love to do is just very quickly, many of you have expertise in the Thinking Maps, but I just want to go through some guiding questions for each one of the maps. And one of the reasons I'm doing this with you really quickly is the idea of framing. So what I'm going to ask you to do is something, here's a practical activity that I'd basically like you to do is ask yourself for a second, where have you learned all your information about apples? So just take 10 seconds, 20 seconds, not much time. Where have you learned about apples? What apples do you like? How do you use apples? Maybe you don't like apples. Has somebody taught you about apples? I remember my grandmother teaching me and my grandfather teaching me how to make an apple pie. So just take a moment, think about just a minute, where have you gotten all your information about apples? This is a typical framing question. So instead of just saying to a student, what do you know about a topic? The first thing you might say is, well, here's a topic. what do you know about it? We call this prior knowledge, basically. Often we just say, well, you know, what do you know about apples? But where do you get your information? Where are the prior experiences that will, in a sense, frame the information you know? So that's one of the just key questions. Even in the development of prior knowledge, which is we're going to get back to in the area of formative assessment, it's a key question. What are your prior experiences? So I'm going to just go through very quickly the thinking maps. Some folks have deep expertise and have been using the thinking maps for years. Some of you might be just getting an introduction to them. So let me just go through relatively quickly. The circle map is used for defining and brainstorming. So I might ask the question, what is the definition of an apple? What do you know about an apple? So some of the key terms are, define it, brainstorm it, list, identify, tell everything you know about. So that is the circle map for defining or brainstorming. Another question that we might ask is, which word best describes or what are the qualities of an apple? So describe, use the characteristics, the adjectives, the qualities, the properties. So one of the things that we're doing is that with each one of the thinking maps, they're based on a fundamental cognitive skill, but they're also fundamentally based on questions that we ask every day of students across the disciplines. So for example, with the bubble map, and I want to just focus on this one map a little bit here, it's not for brainstorming. It's not for just generating everything you know. It's for a particular kind of thinking, and that is the describing of something. So oftentimes in literature, we call them characteristics. Let's say there are characters in a story. What are those characteristics? And we use adjectives. In science, we use the term properties. What are the properties of some element? In mathematics, or maths, as they're called there, what are the attributes? So one of the key dimensions here is seeing that the maps represent cognitive processes. They represent fundamental questions that we ask. They're a tool for having students display what they know in their thinking, but they're also keyed into fundamental vocabulary and kinds of questions we ask across disciplines. So that's the bubble map for describing. The double bubble map, which is playful in a lot of ways. A lot of people compare it to the Venn diagram, but this is much more organized, dynamic, and reflects the capacity of comparing and contrasting. So how are an apple and an orange, or an apple and a lemon compared? How are they alike and different? Please compare and contrast. What are the similarities and differences? By the way, as we ask this question all the time, I was just reviewing a national curriculum, and the question about comparison comes up everywhere. So when students have the vocabulary, they've internalized the questions and they have a tool for doing this. They have a way into answering your questions when you say, please compare to leaders in history, to politicians that are running for president. We have an election coming up here in the United States. I would ask students and all of us to compare the two leaders that are vying for the presidency. So fundamental to how we think and the questions that we ask. The tree map is for grouping ideas. So this is typically main ideas, supporting ideas, and details. We categorize things all the time. In the sciences, we call it taxonomy, a fundamental process that's been around forever. And you can inductively and deductively use the tree map for grouping ideas. The brace map. Let me go back, by the way. So a tree map, you might organize all the different kinds of fruit that are available in your market or in your economy or available to you. In some places, apples aren't grown. So an apple wouldn't even show up in a tree map in some places. So the idea is that the tree map could be used for organizing fruit. It could be used for organizing fruits and vegetables. It could be used for organizing everything that is in a market that includes the produce that we are looking for. Now the brace map is for part-whole relationships. So what are the physical parts of something, and what are the minor or smaller parts of it? So again, in the sciences, we call this anatomy. In literature, we might call it the setting, the physical setting. In geography, we're looking at physical states. There's just a whole range of uses for the brace map, particularly focused on the actual physical object. So what are the parts of an apple? What are the minor parts down to the stem and seed and the meat, the whole range of components, basically. So the flow map is for sequencing. Which of these steps comes first? What are the stages of? So we look at sequences, stages, cycles, patterns, steps. I'm staying with the science field for right now. Oftentimes we're looking at physiology. What are the sequences of any kind of system, sort of cycles of the growth from a seed to an apple, which brings up, of course, the existential problem of which came first, the chicken or the egg. But right here, what we're looking at is, what are the sequences? It could be the narrative of a story that you're reading in fiction. It could be really dynamically the narrative of history. It could be any kind of sequence in problem solving and in maths. A lot of folks, though, a lot of students actually come out of school really focused on sequencing, because we do a lot of it. We sequence all the time, but it really leads into the kind of questions that are deeper, I believe, deeper in a different way, with questions that deal with cause and effect. Why did this happen? What are the benefits? What are the outcomes of this? What caused this to happen? What are the effects of it happening? So cause and effect reasoning, and the real dynamics of a system. So for example, with an apple, what would cause you to need an apple? Why would you do that? What are the impacts? What are the benefits of that? There are multiple reasons for doing that. But we use cause and effect reasoning all the time. Oftentimes, though, it's a linear question. So we think in sort of cause effect. This caused this to happen. But we know that life is more interesting and dynamic than just simple causes and effects. We really want students to reach back and see, like in history, the historic causes for events, the immediate effects, and the ripple effects. So the whole idea of an apple a day keeps the doctor away. That's a saying I don't know if you use in South Africa, but here in the States is an old phrase, an apple a day. Well, if you just eat one apple one day, it's probably going to have no effect at all other than immediate nutrition for you. But the idea of an apple a day is the long term, the ripple effects. So one of the focal points I think a lot of teachers get sort of fixed on are the sequences of things. And that can be very powerful, but it's also shifting that dynamism to a much deeper multi-flow map and the kind of vocabulary. And last, but not least, is the bridge map for seeing analogies. And a lot of people look at analogies as being very complex. Oh, it's a higher order thinking process. But in fact, making analogies is as simple as the color of the apple is red, just as, well, the color of the sky is blue, the color of the trees that I'm looking out my window at are green. The bird that's on the feeder outside my window here is yellow. So you can start with a 3- and 4-year-old using analogies and building it out. And so this is really key to thinking processes, because when we bridge ideas together, then we're taking a central concept and bridging it from one side to another and keep extending it. So very quickly, I just went through the 8 thinking maps. And what's key here is developing fluency with these 8 maps. But it isn't just the maps. So what's key here is, how do we really focus students on being able to not just be able to use a map, but also to be able to ask these questions of themselves. So as we went through each of the maps, I would expect a student who has been introduced to the maps after, and some of this is developmental. So obviously with 5- and 6-year-olds, it's going to take a little bit longer, but within 2 to 3 months, every student in your classroom, every student in your school can be fluent with the maps at a basic fundamental level. If you had a chance to look at the video I suggested, you'll see that here is only a 2nd-year teacher, sort of a rookie teacher, is working with 1st graders, 1st and 2nd graders. And within 2 months, they were able to generate, after reading a story, which maps they would use for what. One of the things that you didn't see in that video is the teacher then asked the students, after they had thought about which thinking maps they would use, they went back to their desks and independently chose which map they would use personally to write write up and sketch out and draw out using a map their thinking about the story. And then they did a short piece of writing. So this idea of going from reading to verbalizing their thinking, to visualizing the thinking processes, to then to a piece of writing with 1st and 2nd graders, most people would find phenomenal, but it's actually quite natural once the students have become fluent. So let me also give you an activity that you can use around framing, because I sort of let go of this. Here's a simple piece of paper, okay? So what I do is I just fold it in half, and here's what I do. I take scissors, and I cut out the center, and what I have is a frame. So one of the things you can do is have students take a blank sheet of paper, create a frame, and write in anything that comes to mind about what is influencing whatever map that they're doing. And then they can lay it down there. So one of the things is with this, I call it a floating frame because it's always changing as well. So the idea is not just, are students able to identify the maps? Are they able to respond to your questions when you ask, which map would you use? But to what degree are they fluent, not just with the maps, but with that metacognitive question, how do you know this? Where did you get your information? What is influencing what you know about this topic? Now, an apple may not be too controversial at all, but when we get into issues of looking at history, when we're even looking at science and scientific discovery, I mean, think of COVID right now and what's going on in the field of sciences. You have different frames of reference that influence how people perceive and use the scientific knowledge that's available. So the frame of reference really elevates the student's thinking to a very high level. So the frame of reference, but developing fluency in each one of the tools is key. And let me just, I'm going to be able to send this forward to you, which is a page you may already have in some of the training materials, which is questioning using the frame. Where did you get this information to support your view? What prior knowledge and experiences influence your view? What are the cultural influences on your perspective? So age and gender, ethnic and religious background, political, geographic, the certain class you're in, a whole range from race to class to gender. What is influencing your perspective? Where is it that you live in the world? How does that influence you? And what are the belief systems that may influence you? I mean, right now with COVID-19, if we want students, especially at the older age levels, to be able to think about what's going on globally and then what's going on locally, and I'm saying locally in their own family, in their own community, in their own country, then we have to bring in, I believe, these questions that ask students, what do you believe? What are your beliefs? What are your political beliefs? What are your family's beliefs that may be influencing you on how you perceive what's going on around the world? So these values and beliefs are key. So just to sort of summarize where I am right now with this is what we're looking at is developing fluency with the thinking processes, the thinking maps that help students to visually map out their ideas in 8 different ways, if you will, but also the frame of reference. How fluent are students with really thinking about what's in their map? What are the ideas that are being developed there? This could be the interpretation of a story that they're reading in literature. It could be the interpretation of history. It could be really looking at the interpretation of a scientific discovery and the implications for it. It could be in the economics field, and even in mathematics. Right now, I think one of the bigger issues around the world are statistics. How do we read statistics? And so what's influencing our perception of all of these numbers that are coming out around the world about what we're going through? So these 2 ideas, the frame of reference and fluency, are really key to understanding the maps, because if the students aren't independent users of the thinking maps and they're not bringing in that frame of reference, then they basically are still looking to you, to us as teachers, for saying, oh, which map should I use? Or what kind of thinking should I be using? Or what? Jane, you and I were talking just the other day about this, the idea that so many students are now at home. They're not home alone. They're with family members. Maybe they're getting some support from us as educators. Maybe many of them are in classrooms still. But even when they leave our classrooms, they need to become, from my belief system, independent and reflective thinkers. And by having a language of tools that are reflected in their fundamental thinking processes, they have a way of mapping out their ideas and then framing it. So where does this lead us? This really, for me, leads into the whole idea of formative assessment. The idea that if we are really to use the thinking maps as an additional, not a replacement, but as an additional way to really have a daily ongoing formative assessment of students' thinking and content learning, they have to be fluent with the maps. This is absolutely key. If the students aren't fluent with the maps, and we want to use the maps at this next level of formative assessment, they need to be really pretty fluent with them so that the map is not getting, in a sense, getting in the way of their thinking. I used to teach writing. That was really my focus in the middle age, what we call middle school here. I was a teacher of writing with the National Writing Project in Berkeley, California. And it was really powerful when we started actually using rubrics so that students had an idea of the assessment tool that was being used to assess their writing. And what I discovered very soon on is that we were trying to assess their writing oftentimes, and we were actually trying to assess what they knew about content through their writing, but their writing wasn't all that good. So we were using an assessment tool, the writing process, in a way that was ineffective. Same sort of thing. Let me, maybe I'm thinking I'm not being as clear here. I remember when I was teaching and I'd be in front of my classroom and I'd say, okay, could you please tell me about this story we read? Oh, maybe it was a Shakespearean play, Romeo and Juliet. Well, not many hands went up. One, because students are oftentimes shy, but also that a lot of students don't like to verbalize their thinking. So I was trying to get an assessment of what students knew about this play that they had just read, but they weren't strong in their abilities to verbalize. Other students aren't strong with their abilities to write. So the thinking maps become an additional very strong tool for students to be able to map out their thinking and then verbalize from the map, or do a piece of writing, or actually submit their thinking maps as tools so that we can assess where they are conceptually. In the chapter that I sent you, and I haven't been referring to it much because I think it's relatively straightforward, you can see that my co-author and I were really looking at this idea of bifocal assessment. How do we engage students at a level of fluency and to a certain degree framing, so then we could get to a level and they could get to a level that we could do formative assessment. And let me just bring up, I'm going to do this very quickly. I know that we just have a few minutes left, but I want to just sort of close out with this idea of that if we understand that these fundamental thinking processes go across disciplines, and as a student comes into our schools, let's say at 4 and 5 years old, they are developing cognitively on their own, and we bring in the thinking maps, we are going to actually be able to see the development of their thinking over the years, as well as their content development. And to me, here's some examples. I'm going to go through these very quickly. This is sort of the speed dial approach here, right at the end, to get a sense of where students go. So here is, excuse me, let me jump in here a little bit. There we go. Okay, here's the at family. Maybe some of you have seen these slides. Here's a 4-year-old. Just what do you know about the word at, or better yet, how do you use AT, bat, fat, hat, sat, mat? What about the sun? What are the qualities of the sun? What are the parts of a flower? Notice here, it's even just drawing in the maps. What's the sequence of Goldilocks and the 3 bears using the flow map? Compare 2 presidents, American presidents, Lincoln and George Washington, using the double bubble map. An analogy, the wig has a color purple as the sun has a color yellow. Going into science, here we have a student has become so fluent, he can basically use 4 or 5 maps to show what he knows about matter. So I'm going to stop right there. I know that we just have a minute left, but I think that this is a really good example of a student who is able to use multiple maps together to show what he knows. And it's because he's fluent with the maps and he has a frame of reference for thinking about his thinking. So that was very quick, a quick hour, but I hope you enjoyed it.
David, we do have a little bit of time left on this platform if you have time to take some questions. I don't know if you have another commitment that you need to go off to right now. Have you got?
I have definitely time for questions.
That would be really great. So if I could just ask people to give us, and Dan, if you could check also on the YouTube platform, let's gather a couple of questions for David. Please put them in the.
And then also I can proceed for another 15 or 20 minutes. I know
Perfect.
that,
if you're happy to,
yeah.
we're delighted. So
Oh yeah, I was looking at the time, and my time frames got a little mixed up. So this is sort of
no, it's absolutely fine. We're delighted.
Yeah,
thank you.
Good. So questions, and then I'll go for about another 20 minutes.
Okay, so we have an example, a question here about, could you give us an example of a map we could use in high school maths to develop problem-solving skills? And I must say, David, we get this question a lot. This works so well in other subjects, but what about maths? So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Right. Actually, on my slides, I don't have an advanced maths example, but what I'd like to send, we have a whole section in our revised training guide on maths and higher order thinking with mathematics, problem solving in particular. A lot of what I see mostly done in maths is the use of the flow map for problem solving. So it can come down to quite sequential thinking. But the tree map, let me just go through a couple of examples. A tree map is often used specifically for word problems when students are having to organize the information, the type of information that is within a word problem. So the tree map is used a lot for that. The multi-flow map is used for a lot of if-then probabilities in statistics. There's a lot of use of the brace map for breaking down, especially in geometry. That may not be the advanced high school example you want, but for geometry, a lot of that is spatial reasoning. So the brace map is used to break down physical structures. A lot of times it's comparatives as well with the double bubble map. So I might have, boy, I don't know if I have it right here, but what I'll be able to send to you is the full chapter, and maybe you can send it out, Jane, to everybody.
That would be awesome. Thank you, David. That would be great.
Yeah.
I think, we do have some maths examples in our curriculum, but I have to say it's the one area we have the fewest examples that we have to show. And maybe that's our fault for not collecting them, but it is a question we often hear that there's sometimes a little resistance from maths teachers. So it would be helpful for us. And there's another question about transferring what they have presented in a map to a written task. It is something we cover in the training, and I'm happy to hear your answer, but on that as well, I could send the person who asked that a little bit more info.
Why don't I jump into a slide? I was going to, after this interlude where we could have questions, let me actually go to an example, Jane, because I think that this is really key.
Very helpful. Very helpful.
Okay, so here, let me give you, this is actually, I did a lot of work in New York City some years ago, a lot of work, especially in areas that were low socioeconomic status, a lot of African-American youth, and it was actually very close to Kennedy Airport. So at Kennedy Airport in the United States, you may or may not know, is a central receiving area for people from around the world. So this school, the schools that I was working in had this diverse student population with sometimes 50 different languages in the school. So this is not from, let's say, a typical suburban school in the United States. And let me show you what happened here. The students have become fluent with the maps. That was key. And they were assigned, they were given this assignment: research a famous African-American figure. map out all the information you've gathered about this figure, and then write an essay. So this student chose that, again, I want to make this clear. The teacher did not assign, I want you to do this map and then this map and then this map. The students had become so fluent that they could go to a piece of writing relatively quickly. So Frederick Douglass, here are the descriptors. Notice that most of these are adjectives: courageous, heroic, dedicated, determined, smart, black, a fighter, an abolitionist. So Frederick Douglass was a major figure in American history for his really courageous efforts at fighting slavery. So the student had developed these qualities, the descriptors of Frederick Douglass, from different books, and back then there wasn't the internet. This was a long time ago. Then the student used a tree map to develop the main idea of the essay, so that was going to be written. So the idea is, this is Frederick Douglass's life. This is the big picture umbrella concept for Frederick Douglass. And then the three areas that the student wanted to write about. So the obstacles that he had to overcome, the accomplishments that he did in his life, and that the specific things that Frederick Douglass did to end slavery. So what you have here are all of these details underneath. As a teacher of writing, it's always ultimately about sequencing your ideas. So the student obviously then had to go from a tree map to a flow map. So here is a sequence of Frederick Douglass's life in the sense of basically a biography. So here's that transition point that the question was about. Then how do you go to the essay? Well, the student went right into the essay, integrating all of the ideas. Obviously, you're not going to be able to read this essay right now, but you can see that the essay was presented using all the information in the maps. What's not here is what I would suggest that with some facilitation is that the students would map out the paragraphs of the essay. It's partially done here in more of a narrative style rather than a conceptual one. But here's a key to pulling this together. If you can see this is what I would suggest is the power of the thinking maps in the sense of going to any kind of nonfiction, is that you have this, and this is a formative assessment. This is, what is your thinking? What's all the information you have? And then going to the piece of writing. What often happens, and it's in every single discipline, I believe, is that what the student knows or has come to understand or has learned may not be well represented in the assessments that we give. And so if we were to ask the student, what do you know about Frederick Douglass? I want you to write an essay. Maybe the student created all of these beautiful, rich, deep maps, and that's all you'd have to look at. You wouldn't have to even look at the piece of writing. You could say, just a minute, this student has learned all of this content and has organized it in a way that I can read the maps. Now, the added benefit here is that we went to a piece of writing. So now we can assess the formative development of the student's thinking using the maps, but we can also begin to analyze and assess the actual writing process. How well is this final piece of writing produced? But both of them together become a powerful way into formative assessment. So great question.
Mm. And David, we found in almost every single school, when they start to use thinking maps, this is one of the first things that is so apparently improved is, the generation of great adjectives, the ordering of writing, that it flows logically. And instead of throwing all kinds of ideas at a piece of paper, they are really well organized, and there's more understanding and more clarity. And that's something that Elmarie Peterson and her course that she's doing for us is really taking that in our curriculum to say, look, this really does work. It's really powerful. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
We've got two other questions. Okay, so two questions. One is about editable thinking maps available, where teachers can edit as needed. And I know we quite like our maps at times just to not be too neat. They can, thinking is something that grows, and it doesn't matter if it's perfectly presented. In fact, messy thinking is often growing thinking. But that is just a question that is one of the questions about editable thinking maps. And then the other one is, I use some of the maps for starting off creative writing. The students tend not to want to use the maps, but prefer to go straight to the piece of writing. Do we need to still encourage the map skill?
Okay, let me go with first the editing the thinking maps, and then the messiness of thinking, and then creative writing.
And so perhaps if children are resistant to use the maps, maybe it's something there that we need to encourage.
Yes. Okay. So one, we do have thinking map software that's available. Of course, it costs, so there are costs involved. But that's something maybe we can talk about in the future, Jane, in the sense of making the software available. It's in the United States, we focus on the whole school use of thinking maps rather than selling individual licenses. And so it's a very low cost way where everybody in the whole school has access, not just to the thinking maps software, the students, all the teachers, they can take it home, use it, things like that. But it also means that fluency develops, and you can save the student work, and you can really edit, as from a teacher's point of view, being able to edit presentations and PowerPoints and integrate them in. So it's, to me, that's really key. The other thing we have, it's called the Thinking Maps Learning Community. And once a school acquires a license to that, then they also have endless examples of thinking maps from across the United States and from some other countries. So editing the maps is really key. Again, we do not suggest using blackline masters or pre-formed maps, even with 4- and 5-year-olds, unless there's really problems with drawing. There's a very small percentage of students that have fine motor problems. That may be the only area that I would suggest not going to. The messiness of the maps is a great question. I love this question, because one of the keys is that thinking is it can be wild, it can be messy, it can be really associative in its way. And for me, one of the keys is recognizing that we don't even, once the students have become fluent with the maps, they may jot down just a few words in a map. They may sketch out the map. They may not even put any words in it. I've seen students just create, let's say, like a tree map and not even put anything in there, and then they get the idea. They get the concept. They don't need to create the map at all. So think of it as a language that becomes so internalized that they're visually making the maps in their head. And this is, I think this is where the idea of fluency comes into play, is not just messy maps on a page, but it's messy maps in your head that help you to think through an idea, to get a concept, to crystallize a concept in your mind. You don't even need to use the maps. Let me just go to the creative writing question. I used to teach creative writing a lot, and I would never ask a student to use a thinking map if it was in any way interfering with their creative spirit. So it's one of those things, if the students have become fluent with them, then they draw on the map. I mean, they may start a what with the National Writing Project, we just called free writing, which is, associative writing. It's just journaling, just a flow of ideas. Well, that's really powerful. And then, and you may want to just leave it there. Why go beyond that? There might be so much right in that journal, creating a journal and free association, that there's, you don't want to go anywhere else. Though, if you talk to most writers, creative writers as well as nonfiction, they'll say ultimately they had to organize their ideas if they wanted to bring forward, let's say, a short story or even a poem or a novel, is that you want to develop in students that fluency of writing, but also a fluency of thinking. And so if on a page, students are making, this goes back to the messiness question, if students are making a massive messy maps, and if you'd seen some of mine, you'd be probably scared. They're all over the place. And that is exactly where we want to go. We want students to be able to do that. Yet, we also want them to be able to organize their ideas to get to that final piece of writing. And then I forget there was a last question there, Jane.
We have a couple of others, but I like what you're saying, because it's an iterative process. Obviously we don't get to the final, result straight away. So part of the organizing.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of other questions. One was just a comment, is just how useful thinking maps to actually be able to organize your thinking quickly in an exam situation. And instead of just jumping right in, it just helps you organize your thinking before you compose your answer. And so it was one point. And then the other thing was about, you spoke about the importance of a frame of reference. And I'm guessing that there are many answers to this question, but sort of how much thinking and time and writing would go into the frame of reference. For example, in the essay that you showed where, students were collecting information about a hero that they were going to write about, what kind of emphasis would you have placed on the frame of reference? How much would have gone into that? That's one of the questions.
Yeah, let me answer that one first, and then I'll back into the test taking context. In that situation, as a teacher, if I saw those 3 maps about Frederick Douglass, at some point, and this is where facilitation comes in, this is where the teacher and the coaching comes in, I would say that those maps are, I would come to a student, look over the maps and ask some questions about each one, and I'd say something like, why don't you put a frame? I would suggest putting a frame around the bubble map that you describe Frederick Douglass. What are some of the qualities that you have as an individual that made you interested in Frederick Douglass? What are some of the experiences that you've had that are similar to Frederick Douglass's life or these qualities that he has? And so what is it that in your background that has come to light around issues of slavery? I mean, right now and globally, we're looking at Black Lives Matter here in the United States and to a certain degree globally. So that question of what is in your background that's really influencing your even understanding and gathering information about Frederick Douglass. So that would be really key. Now, sometimes, you can overdo it with the frame of reference. You can, the metacognitive question spirals down and you go, just a minute, we're asking this too much. Sometimes it's just like, get on with it, right? Just let's do it. And it's not important. So I think part of it is just having, when I use this example of this activity with the frame, it's sort of like the My Story activity that we ask students to do. What is your background? What has influenced your life? And the more students are just aware of that intuitively or sometimes explicitly, it drives how they do everything in life, because they're more reflective in their own thinking. So I wouldn't overdo it with the frame, but I would use it as a very rich go-to place for us as teachers to coach students to think more deeply about subjects that they otherwise wouldn't. So to me, that's really key. Let me answer the other question, because I do have a slide that I can show, the one about questioning in the midst of the tests. When I was first developing the maps and presenting them to teachers, they were saying, well, just a minute, we have all these assessments, and how are students going to perform on the test? How do they use the maps on the test? Well, one thing is, if they're fluent with the maps, when they get to a question that says, compare these two figures or compare these two things, immediately they're visualizing, most students are visualizing a double bubble map, and they're making it in their head. So here's an example of a student who, I was at a school, and this was a 5th grader, so what, 10 years old, and they had just had standardized tests, and the teacher came out. I was at this school the day they were doing the standardized test, and the teacher, one of the teachers that I had trained, came out of her classroom. I couldn't go in because it was, proctored, if you will. And the teacher came out and she said, my students are using the maps during the test. I didn't tell them to, because they can't give them those kind of strategies. They were using them during the test. It was really exciting. I said, hey, go back in there and just ask the students to jot down their thinking, what was going on when they were using the maps. Because I really was, part of my frame is as a researcher, I'm really interested in, on a very pragmatic basis, what happens with kids when they're using the map. So she went back into the classroom. She asked students to just jot down a few notes about how they used the maps on the test. So I'm going to read this. It may not be large enough on your screen. So Lauren, and this is straight out, I used the flow map, and we've been using them so much that when I got done my first box, I didn't need to use it because the flow map was in my head. I got my topic sentence down, and my details just seemed to flow right out. And this is beautiful. I mean, this is, when we're talking about fluency. So Lauren had been using the maps for she was just fluent with them. It was just like the air she breathed. She got into the test. She was given an assignment. It looks like a writing assignment, because in standardized tests here, you do have to do pieces of writing. And so she says, oh, we've been using the flow map for writing. To get my ideas in sequence. So she just started to do it. The important thing here is that she did it in her head. She didn't need to map out the whole piece of writing that she was going to do, because both her thinking is fluent, the processes of getting sequential paragraphs all lined up from beginning, middle, and end, or your main topic sentence and your issues all the way through to the end. So to me, this is actually a very good expression of what we've been looking at today with the idea of fluency, metacognition. So the idea, when I asked what is metacognition, the idea here is that she was saying, how am I going to think about this? And she says, I need to do sequential thinking. So it's not thinking about just what you know, but thinking about the thinking processes that you're going to use. To me, that's sort of a radical or root definition of metacognition. So she was able to really draw on the thinking intuitively and consciously and explicitly and deliver.
David, that ties in pretty well with another comment or a question that we have about, what are some of the deeper long-term benefits of using these strategies regularly? And it was great that you spoke about that kind of fluent metacognition. It just becomes something that one really becomes aware of how you're thinking, and you're able to organize your thinking. And I wondered if you could give us just some words about the longer term benefits, and just my personal add to this would be, I know you've spoken a lot about how thinking maps help to develop and deepen habits of mind, and I believe that too, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I have gotten correspondence from people over the years that have graduated out of high school, gone through university even, and I had one correspondence from a woman that had passed the bar exam for becoming an attorney, and she had used the maps for studying for her law exams. So I think what's interesting to me is that the long-term effects are the greatest when students have continuity from school to school. Like, we have whole school systems where, starting from age 5 through graduation at high school, the students have been using the maps. So it just becomes like, oh, we're reading, we're writing, we're mapping. It's just the air you breathe. The long-term implications really, I believe, are in that internally, when we're making decisions on a day-to-day basis about our life, and this is the other thing I've heard endlessly, is that, particularly from teachers, is that they're using the maps in their own life, in problem solving, decision making. There's a really good example. I could send you the chapter in the Student Successes book, or no, it was the leadership book, of a lead administrator in Syracuse, New York, who was on a jury trial. And she was in the jury room with everybody else, and they were having to decide a very important case. And she looked around the room. Everybody was talking at each other. They were just going on and on about well, I think this, and I think this, and I think this. And it was, the jury was what you call deadlocked, right? They couldn't come to a decision. And she suggested, oh, I want to just can we just map out our ideas? I'm really confused about what everybody's thinking. And immediately people came together. They could see the different points of view. They could see their frame of reference, and they came to a resolution. She wrote that up. I'll send that to you, Jane, because we published it, it was very important. So the idea is that if it becomes intuitive, it becomes just it's not a tool anymore. It just reflects fundamental patterns of thinking that we use every day. Like, hey, what caused this fellow to commit this crime, if he did or not? Compare this to other kinds of crimes. What's the narrative of the evidence? What is the cumulative, like using a tree map? What's all the evidence, and how is it organized? What are the qualities or characteristics of this defendant? What is my background frame that's influencing how I'm judging and making a decision about whether this person goes to jail or not? That is very powerful, but we make decisions like that every day in our personal lives, with our family, with our own decisions about where our life goes. And to me, that's, by the way, the Minds of Mississippi documentary, I don't know if this is a part of it, but I can link to another video where a college student is just talking about how it's transformed her life, in the sense she uses it everywhere. She uses it with her husband because he has a business. So he has to think through his business. I mean, she's a teacher. So I just think that one of the things is the thinking maps aren't artificial. I believe they really do reflect what we already do intuitively. They're not, they come from that. They're not a sort of a strategy that's pulled out of the air.
David, I've got two stories that I think maybe we need to share with you more explicitly. But I mean, just for me personally, I mean, my husband's an entrepreneur, and we've used thinking maps a lot in terms of his developing business strategies or writing proposals for clients and that sort of thing. And it really does work. I even use them I use a tree map for shopping. So that I'm part of the supermarket I'm going to. But what was really great, and I don't know if he is participating this afternoon, but one of our trainers, Linda Shazy, he is on the South African Principals Association. And they have these meetings with all the principals. And he just said, well, enough already. We can't carry on these meetings in this way. Let's be much more effective. Let's share our thinking. And I wish it had been videoed, but he wrote me such a wonderful story about how using thinking maps in these meetings had just helped everybody move forward. And you know, to understand what page are we on and where are we going and what are the issues. And it definitely works in real life in all kinds of ways. And obviously school is also real life, but it's about thinking, and humans do that, and they do that forever, and they need strategies to be able to organize their thinking. So I think it's amazing that you have managed to put the thinking maps together in the first place, in terms of giving an explicit visual reference for each thinking process. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me just say that I want to make available to you and everybody there the research we did on leadership, and it's the book is Developing Connective Leadership. I don't know that you're able to download it off of my website, but I can send that on, and it shows how from individual through a whole school system, from collaborative teams to meetings to whole school to whole systems, how the thinking maps have been used. And I think that if anything, that sort of answers the developmental question too, is that these fundamental thinking processes are so basic to us as human beings that when we have explicit access to them and we use them collaboratively, there's the greatest benefit, because then we have that common language. And it isn't the all of it. It's, you know, we talk, we write, we scribble, we do a lot of different, we do art, there are a lot of different ways to express what we're thinking. But I think that book would help, gain even greater insight into going beyond just the teacher-student relationship to the teacher-teacher relationship, to the drive team, to the whole school, to even, we've had experiences like in Malaysia where the whole country is implementing the thinking maps. So it can become a foundation if we really focus on the fluency rather than it being, here are a few tools that can be used, or we sort of use them, or the students sort of know them, but it's really about commitment to saying we're in it for the long-term, lifelong development of student thinking.
David, wow, what a lovely opportunity for us to spend this afternoon with you, and thank you for sharing your resources with us so generously. And obviously, we are looking forward to our ongoing collaboration and interaction with you, and just really want to thank you for what you've done for us today. And I really hope that we'll see you out here in person in February. I am going to introduce you to Trevor McKenzie, who is somebody who has given us a lot of inspiration there he is, in learning. And I've been wanting to introduce the two of you to each other. So maybe that could also, we spoke about probably putting a panel discussion together sometime, and I'd love to have both of you on that. So thank you for both of you for helping us, develop and deepen our practice. And it's a joy to, for us in South Africa to be connecting with people around the world and learning, and we really appreciate that. So
thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. And David, I just want to say it was fantastic to finally hear you speak. I've obviously been following along your work through Thinking School South Africa, and so to spend an hour with you listening, it was quite powerful. So thank you so much. And I look forward to connecting with you in the future, David. Thank you, Jane.
Well, thank you everybody for attending this afternoon. It is the most chaotic time I think we've ever experienced. And what always gets me out of bed in the morning is the passion of teachers that are so committed. And today is also a sign of that commitment. And thank you to all of you, and David especially, thank you for joining us and for giving so freely of your time and your wisdom. And thank you, Dan, for getting this whole platform together and overcoming many obstacles on the way. So it's really been fantastic. And to everybody who has listened today, we are here to support you. We are going to be using the Thinking Zone as a place to keep you up to date with what's going on and how we can help. But we are here, we can chat, we can video chat. We are here to answer your questions and to be a sounding board for you. So thanks a lot, everybody. It's been awesome, really.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Okay.
Much appreciation.
See you next time. Thanks a million. Bye.
Take care, everybody. Be well.
Yes, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Dan.
Jane.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. We had almost 195 attendees.
That's awesome. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Dan. I really do appreciate it. And thanks, everybody. I know some of you are still leaving. It's been absolutely wonderful, and we look forward to doing this again sometime.
Thanks, Jane.
Have a great evening.
You too.